Please, just for a moment, close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Can you smell the faint, slightly bitter scent of honeycomb coal smoke drifting through the narrow alleyways on a crisp winter morning? Can you hear the heavy, metallic ticking of a mechanical alarm clock resting on a wooden bedside table, counting the quiet seconds of a world that no longer exists? Welcome back to the 1970s and 1980s. Today we are going to embark on a beautiful, slightly melancholic journey into our shared past. We are going to dust off 20 deeply cherished, completely forgotten details of daily life in China that we have lost forever. These are the textures, the sounds, and the simple joys that defined our youth. And please, stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we are going to revisit is perhaps the most touching, the most profound piece of our childhood that will surely bring a tear to your eye and a warm smile to your heart. Before we open this time capsule, let us reflect on how incredibly different the flow of time felt back then. Time did not rush past us in a blur of glowing screens and instant notifications. It moved slowly, gently, like a quiet river. It was an era where waiting was an essential, beautiful part of life. We waited weeks for a handwritten letter to arrive, and that anticipation made the words on the page infinitely more precious. Modern society often tries to tell us that life before smartphones and instant deliveries was somehow poorer or less fulfilling. But you and I know the absolute truth. While we may have had less material wealth, our emotional lives were incredibly rich. Our days were built on genuine human connections, relying on neighbors, sharing scarce resources, and finding immense joy in the smallest of victories. The lack of modern conveniences did not make us empty. Instead, it forced us to look at one another, to speak to one another, and to live fully in every single unhurried moment. We were richer in spirit than anyone could possibly measure. Let us take a moment to remember the tiny, colorful pieces of paper that used to dictate our daily lives. I am talking about the ration coupons, those delicate slips of paper that our mothers kept folded so carefully in a small cloth handkerchief. Do you remember the texture of them? They were thin, sometimes fragile, carrying the weight of a family's survival. In the 1970s, having money alone meant very little if you did not have the right coupon to go with it. There was a specific ticket for everything you could imagine: a grain coupon, a cooking oil coupon, a cotton coordinator, and even a bicycle coupon if you were incredibly lucky. You would stand in a long, quiet line at the local supply store, gripping those tiny papers in your hand, making sure the wind did not blow them away. When it was your turn, you handed them over to the clerk, who would meticulously stamp or collect them in exchange for a bag of precious rice or flour. The feeling of smoothing out a wrinkled grain ticket on the wooden counter is something modern generations will never understand. It was not just about buying groceries. It was an intricate dance of planning, of stretching a limited supply to ensure that every single child in the house went to bed with a warm belly. Those coupons were a testament to the incredible resilience and careful management of our parents. Now try to recall the magnificent presence of the 28-inch heavy-duty bicycle. This was not just a mode of transportation. It was a proud family heirloom, a symbol of stability, and the ultimate dream of every household. Whether it was a flying pigeon or a Phoenix brand, the thick black steel frame felt indestructible. Do you remember the distinct, sharp ring of its metal bell echoing down the street? As children, we often got to sit sideways on the top tube, holding tightly onto the cold metal handlebars, feeling the wind rush past our faces as our fathers pedaled with steady, strong legs. The seat was wide and made of thick brown leather, with heavy springs underneath that squeaked rhythmically with every bump in the dirt road. Washing and oiling that bicycle on a Sunday morning was a sacred ritual. Fathers would carefully wipe down the spokes with a rag, making the chrome shine brilliantly in the morning sun. Learning to ride it was a rite of passage. We were so small that our feet could not reach the pedals from the seat, so we had to slip one leg through the triangular frame, pedaling awkwardly but with immense, bursting pride. That heavy steel machine carried whole families, sacks of winter cabbage, and the simple happiness of a Sunday outing. Let us turn our memories to the unforgettable scent and the daily ritual of the honeycomb coal briquettes. For anyone who lived in a traditional courtyard or a narrow alleyway, this was the absolute heartbeat of domestic life. The coal briquettes were dark, heavy, and pierced with holes, looking exactly like a piece of honeycomb. Managing the coal stove was an art form that every mother mastered perfectly. Do you remember the heavy iron tongs used to grip the briquettes? The clanking sound of metal against hard coal was the first sound of the morning. Waking up in a freezing room, someone had to quickly tend to the stove to make sure the fire from the night before had not completely died out. You had to align the holes of the new briquette perfectly with the burning one below it to let the air flow. If you failed, the room would fill with thick, acrid white smoke that made your eyes water and your lungs cough. But when it burned brightly, the heat radiating from that small stove was the center of the universe. We boiled our water on it, cooked our simple meals on it, and dried our wet cotton shoes near it. The faint smell of coal smoke lingering on winter coats is a fragrance that instantly transports us back to a time when warmth was something you had to actively work for. Think back to the brightly colored enamel mugs and wash basins that lived in every single home. They were beautiful, practical, and almost completely indestructible. The bright white enamel was usually painted with vibrant red peonies, galloping horses, or the bold red characters for double happiness. But they were never perfect for long, were they? We all remember the distinct black patches where the enamel had chipped away after being dropped on a concrete floor. Those chipped spots slowly turned a rusty brown, giving each mug its own unique character and history. Drinking hot boiled water from an enamel mug was a daily ritual. You had to hold it carefully by the handle because the metal body would burn your hands instantly. Do you remember the loud, hollow, ringing sound it made when you placed it down too hard on a wooden table? The matching enamel wash basins were used for everything. We washed our faces in them every morning, soaking the thin cotton towel in steaming hot water. We washed vegetables in them, and mothers even bathed babies in the larger ones. Those chipped enamel wares were the silent witnesses to our daily routines, representing an era where things were bought once, used for decades, and cherished no matter how battered they became. One of the most magical experiences of our youth was undoubtedly the open-air movie screening. Long before multiplex cinemas and flat screens, movies were a communal event that brought entire villages and neighborhoods together. Do you remember the absolute thrill when word spread that the projectionist was coming to town? In the late afternoon, long before the sun had even set, we would rush to the village square or the factory courtyard, carrying our own small bamboo or wooden stools to claim the best spot. A large, simple white sheet was tied tightly between two trees or wooden poles. As darkness finally fell, the loud hum of the heavy film projector would start, cutting through the chatter of hundreds of people. The beam of light sliced through the dusty night air, dancing with tiny moths and insects. We sat shoulder to shoulder with our neighbors, mesmerized by the flickering images of heroes and historical battles. The audio was often scratchy, playing through a heavy metal loudspeaker, but we did not care at all. Sometimes, if you were late, you had to sit on the reverse side of the screen, watching all the characters move and speak backwards. It was a festival of light and shadows, a rare treat that fueled our imaginations for weeks after the screen was taken down. Let us remember a household object that was as essential as breathing: the bamboo casing thermos bottle. This was not a sleek stainless steel modern gadget. It was a beautiful, slightly fragile masterpiece of daily life. The outer shell was intricately woven from thin strips of bamboo, or sometimes made of brightly painted tin, protecting the fragile glass vacuum flask inside. At the top sat a simple wooden cork stopper, wrapped in a small piece of clean white cloth to ensure a tight seal. Fetching hot water was a daily chore, usually assigned to the children. You would take 2 empty thermoses and walk to the communal boiler room in the neighborhood or factory compound. The air inside the boiler room was thick with white steam, and the loud hiss of boiling water was deafening. You would carefully fill the thermos, making sure not to spill the scalding water on your cloth shoes. Back home, pulling the wooden cork out created a distinct, satisfying popping sound, followed instantly by a thick cloud of steam. We relied on that thermos for making our morning tea, washing our faces, and filling our hot water bottles on freezing winter nights. It stood proudly on the wooden table, a symbol of warmth and comfort in a time when hot water was a precious commodity to be gathered and saved. Let us wander back to the street corners of our childhood and find the small stalls renting out picture story books. Long before video games and cartoons on demand, these palm-sized, beautifully illustrated books were our entire world of entertainment. For just 1 or 2 fen, a single copper coin, you could rent a book and sit on a tiny wooden stool right there on the sidewalk. Do you remember the smell of those books? The paper was soft, slightly yellowed, and the edges were worn smooth by the thousands of little thumbs that had turned the pages before you. We would sit for hours, completely absorbed in the epic tales of historical warriors, revolutionary heroes, and magical folklore. The black and white line drawings were incredibly detailed, and we would study every single stroke. The owner of the stall, usually a kind, older man, would sit quietly reading a newspaper, occasionally reminding us not to tear the pages. We sat in long rows, children from different families, completely silent, bonded by the sheer magic of the stories unfolding in our hands. The noise of bicycles ringing and street vendors calling out faded into the background as our minds soared across ancient battlefields. It was the purest, most innocent form of joy. Can you still taste the sweet, rich magic of a White Rabbit creamy candy? In an era where sweets were a rare and extraordinary luxury, being handed one of these was like receiving a tiny piece of treasure. Do you remember carefully unwrapping the iconic blue, white, and red paper? Inside was a firm, cylindrical white candy, but the most fascinating part was the thin, transparent layer wrapped directly around it. As children, we were always so mesmerized by that inner wrapper made of edible rice paper. Placing it on the tip of your tongue and feeling it instantly melt away was a magical experience every single time. Then came the candy itself. It was incredibly hard at first, requiring patience. You had to let it warm in your mouth until it slowly softened into a rich, chewy, intensely milky delight that glued your teeth together in the best possible way. We made that candy last as long as humanly possible, savoring every single moment of the sweet milk flavor. During the spring festival or at weddings, seeing a handful of White Rabbit candies on the table meant it was a truly special occasion. It was not just a sweet treat, it was the taste of celebration, the taste of parental love, and the non-duted king of our childhood dreams. Let us recall the powerful, crackling voice of the neighborhood or village broadcaster megaphone. Fastened high atop a wooden pole or a large tree, this heavy metal speaker was the alarm clock and the news feed for the entire community. Very early in the morning, the silence of the dawn would be broken by a loud burst of static, followed by the stirring, energetic music of the morning exercises. The sound echoed across the tiled rooftops, impossible to ignore. The broadcaster's voice would follow, delivering local announcements, weather updates, and calling the commune workers to the fields or factory workers to their shifts. It told us when to celebrate, when to work hard, and when a meeting was being held at the local hall. There was something incredibly unifying about hearing the exact same voice at the exact same time as hundreds of your neighbors. You could walk down the street and never miss a word of the broadcast because it played from every direction. It was the invisible thread that tied our communities together. When the speaker finally crackled and popped into silence in the late evening, it signaled to everyone that the day was officially over, and it was time to rest. Think about the iconic fashion statement of our youth, the heavy, dark green army coat. In the 1970s, this was the ultimate symbol of pride, practicality, and warmth. Almost everyone had one, or desperately wanted one. Made of thick, tough canvas and heavily padded with natural cotton, it felt like wearing a protective blanket. Do you remember the distinct, slightly earthy smell of the thick cotton padding on a damp winter day? The brass buttons down the front were cold to the touch. Putting on that coat felt like stepping into a fortress against the bitter, biting winds of winter. It was extremely heavy, weighing down our small shoulders, but it kept us warmer than any modern synthetic fabric ever could. We paired it with green rubber liberation shoes, completing the most fashionable look of the decade. These coats were never thrown away. When the cuffs frayed or a hole appeared, mothers would expertly patch them with a slightly different shade of green fabric. They were passed down from older brothers to younger brothers, getting softer and more faded with each passing year. Wearing that oversized green coat meant you belonged to an era of hard work, solidarity, and enduring strength. Let us relive the immense communal effort of storing winter cabbage. For those living in the northern parts of the country, the arrival of late autumn signaled the beginning of this massive undertaking. The streets and alleyways would suddenly be filled with towering mountains of heavy green and white Chinese cabbages. Buying them was a serious family affair, often purchasing hundreds of pounds at a time. Do you remember the smell of the crisp, cold leaves and the damp earth clinging to their roots? We would spend hours helping our parents carry them home, stacking them meticulously against the sunny walls of the courtyard to dry. Every few days, the entire family would go outside in the biting cold to carefully turn each cabbage, ensuring they did not freeze or rot. Those neatly stacked walls of cabbage were our security blanket for the long, harsh winter ahead. We ate them boiled, stir-fried, pickled, and mixed into dumplings. By the end of winter, we were completely sick of the taste. Yet we were profoundly grateful for the sustenance they provided. Seeing a perfectly built wall of winter cabbage was a sign of a well-managed household, a visual promise that the family would not go hungry when the snow began to fall. I want you to hear the rhythmic, hypnotic clacking of the slow green trains. Journeying across the country was not a matter of a few high-speed hours. It was an epic, days-long adventure inside those dark green metal carriages with bold yellow stripes. The pace was incredibly slow, allowing you to actually watch the vast landscapes of rural China roll by. Do you remember the sheer physical effort it took to push up the heavy glass windows? The moment you did, the rush of fresh air mixed with the harsh smell of coal smoke from the engine would fill the cabin. Inside, the hard seats were packed tightly with people carrying massive woven bags of luggage. The air was a thick mixture of cigarette smoke, peeling oranges, and the savory scent of instant noodles brewing in enamel bowls. But the most beautiful part of the slow green train was the people. Sitting across from complete strangers for 30 hours, you had no choice but to talk. We shared sunflower seeds, played cards, and exchanged life stories with people we would never see again. The slow train forced us to connect, turning a cramped metal box into a temporary, rolling village filled with laughter, snoring, and deep human warmth. Let us go back to the sweltering heat of a midsummer afternoon, and the glorious sound of the wooden block clapping. This was the unmistakable signal that the ice popsicle vendor was walking down the street. The vendor carried a large, square wooden box strapped to the back of a bicycle. Inside that box was absolute heaven. Do you remember the thick, white cotton quilt draped heavily over the top to keep the cold from escaping? We would run out with our precious few Fen coins, our bare feet burning on the hot pavement. The vendor would peel back the heavy quilt, revealing a row of frosty, colorful ice lollipops resting on a bed of cold air. There were no complex flavors, just simple red bean, green bean, or pure sugar water frozen onto a thin wooden stick. Taking that first bite, feeling the sharp, icy cold against your teeth and the sweet syrup melting on your tongue, was the absolute peak of summer joy. The ice melted so fast in the heat that sticky, sweet water would run down our hands and arms. We chased after those wooden boxes like they held magic, and for a few beautiful minutes in the blazing sun, they truly did. Let us take a moment to honor the mechanical alarm clock, a heavy, ticking presence that governed our households. Most families proudly owned one, perhaps a famous Shanghai or diamond brand, with a shiny chrome casing and sturdy little metal legs. It sat proudly on a wooden cabinet, serving as the master timekeeper for the whole family. Do you remember the weight of it in your hands? The sound it made was not a gentle electronic beep. It was a loud, deliberate, heavy ticking sound that completely filled the room when everything else was quiet. Every single night before going to bed, a parent would perform the solemn ritual of winding it up. You had to turn the tight, stiff metal butterfly key on the back until it could not turn anymore, feeling the tension of the spring tightening under your fingers. Setting the alarm involved moving a tiny silver hand to the desired hour. When that alarm went off in the morning, it was an incredibly loud, violent ringing of metal on metal that shocked you out of your dreams instantly. At night, staring at the ceiling, we would watch the faintly glowing green luminescent paint on the clock hands. That ticking clock was the heartbeat of our structured, hard-working lives. Think about the profound art and the painful beauty of writing handwritten letters. In a time before instant messaging and video calls, the only way to communicate with loved ones far away was through the post. Do you remember the thin, almost translucent letter paper, often printed with delicate red lines? We would sit at the table under a dim light, unscrewing the cap of a fountain pen and dipping it into a bottle of dark blue or black ink. The scratch of the metal nib against the soft paper was a sound of deep contemplation. We wrote carefully, knowing that every single word carried immense weight. We wrote about the weather, our health, and our quiet hopes. Then came the ritual of folding the paper, slipping it into an envelope, and licking the bitter glue on the back of a brightly colored stamp. Dropping that letter into the heavy, dark green mailbox on the street corner felt like sending a piece of your soul into the unknown. And then we waited. We waited weeks, checking the neighborhood mailroom every day. When a letter finally arrived, holding the paper that someone you loved had physically touched, recognizing their unique handwriting, brought a rush of emotion that a text message could never, ever replicate. Let us remember the lively, soapy atmosphere of the communal water taps. In many old neighborhoods and courtyard houses, indoor plumbing was non-existent. The single outdoor stone sink with a brass faucet was the gathering place for the entire alley. Do you remember the freezing cold water splashing onto your hands on a winter morning? Washing clothes was a laborious, physical task. Mothers would carry heavy wooden basins filled with laundry, placing them next to the drain. They used a solid wooden washboard with deep grooves, vigorously scrubbing the fabric with a thick bar of harsh yellow soap. The air was filled with the smell of wet cotton and strong lye. But this place was much more than a utility station. It was the social epicenter of our mothers' lives. While hands were scrubbing and wringing out heavy wet sheets, voices were sharing news, offering advice, and laughing at neighborhood gossip. The rhythmic sound of scrubbing, the splashing water, and the loud, cheerful voices blending together created a symphony of community life. We learned about the world standing next to those wet stone sinks, watching the women of our neighborhood work tirelessly while supporting each other through every hardship. Let us wrap ourselves in the warm, slightly scratchy memory of a hand-knitted sweater. Buying a ready-made sweater was a luxury few could afford, so our mothers and grandmothers became master knitters. Do you remember the sight of your mother sitting under the soft, yellow glow of a tungsten light bulb, her hands moving incredibly fast, the long metal knitting needles clicking softly together? The process often started long before the knitting began. We all remember holding out our arms tight and straight, acting as a human spool, while our mothers unraveled the yarn from an old, outgrown sweater to recycle the wool. The yarn was washed, dried, and tightly wound into big, soft balls. The wool was not always soft. Sometimes it was rough and made our necks itch terribly, but it was incredibly thick and completely windproof. Wearing a sweater knitted by your mother was like wearing a physical manifestation of her love and protection. The intricate patterns, the colorful stripes made from leftover yarn, every stitch was a quiet testament to her dedication to keeping you warm. We wore those slightly itchy, beautifully crafted sweaters with immense pride, until we simply could not squeeze into them anymore. Try to recall the slightly intimidating experience of getting a haircut from the street barber with manual clippers. You did not go to a fancy salon with soft music. The barber shop was often just a wooden chair set up under a large shade tree on the side of the road, with a mirror hung on a nail driven into the bark. Do you remember the cold, heavy metal feel of those manual clippers? The barber would rapidly squeeze the handles together, creating a fast, metallic clicking sound right next to your ear. It was a purely mechanical process, relying entirely on the strength of the barber's hands. Sometimes, if the clippers were dull or the barber moved too fast, it would painfully catch and pull a few hairs, making us wince and squeeze our eyes shut. We sat perfectly still, draped in a large white cloth that smelled faintly of old hair clippings and cheap soap. When the cutting was done, the barber would take a large, soft brush, dip it into a tin of fragrant, cooling talcum powder, and dust it across our itchy necks. It was a simple, no-nonsense ritual, leaving us with a very short, very neat haircut, completely ready to face the hot summer days. Let us bring to mind the heavy, rhythmic chugging of the cast-iron sewing machine. Brands like Flying Man or Peony were the proud centerpieces of a well-furnished room. This heavy black machine, adorned with gold floral decals, sat on a beautiful wooden table with a large iron foot pedal underneath. Do you remember the distinct smell of the thin machine oil used to keep the gears running smoothly? When a mother sat down to sew, it was a moment of deep concentration. We would sit on the floor, mesmerized by the fast up and down blur of the needle and the loud mechanical clattering sound that filled the room. Her feet rocked back and forth on the heavy iron pedal, controlling the speed with perfect rhythm. This machine was the source of our new clothes for the spring festival, our mended school trousers, and our warm cotton-padded shoes. Turning a flat, plain piece of cheap fabric into a beautiful new shirt was a form of everyday magic. The sewing machine represented a mother's endless labor, turning raw materials into dignity and warmth for her family, one precise, interlocking stitch at a time. Finally, let us gather around the most sacred piece of furniture in our old homes, the 8 Immortals table. This heavy, square wooden table stood right in the center of the main room, acting as the anchor for the entire family. Above it hung a single, low-wattage incandescent bulb under an enamel shade, casting a warm, dim, circular glow over the wood. This table was where everything happened. We did our homework on it, our mothers chopped vegetables on it, and most importantly, we ate our dinners around it. Do you remember the physical closeness of sitting on long wooden benches alongside your parents and siblings? The meals were simple, mostly grains and preserved vegetables. Meat was a rare luxury, perhaps a few thin slices of pork on a special occasion. But the magic of the 8 Immortals table was in the sharing. A mother would use her chopsticks to place the best piece of meat directly into her child's bowl. A father would share a tiny cup of strong white liquor, sighing off the exhaustion of the day. Around that table, under that dim yellow light, we were completely safe, deeply loved, and fiercely united. We did not have much, but around that square wooden table, we truly had absolutely everything we ever needed. As we open our eyes and return to the fast-paced, brightly lit world of today, a profound realization washes over us. We do not just miss the heavy bicycles, the ration coupons, or the sweet taste of the White Rabbit candy. What we truly, deeply miss is our youth. We miss the feeling of time moving slowly enough to actually savor it. We miss a world where people looked into each other's eyes instead of down at their screens, where neighbors relied on one another, and where the simplest things brought the most absolute joy. The objects may have vanished, but the warmth, the resilience, and the deep love of that era are permanently etched into our souls. If this journey back in time brought a tear to your eye or a smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to preserve these precious memories together. Now I have a question for you, my friend. Out of all the memories we talked about today, or perhaps one we did not mention, what is the single most cherished detail from your youth in the 70s or 80s? Please, write your story in the comments below. I cannot wait to read it and remember the good old days with you.